Welcome on this dreary, wet, pouring day, and welcome to everyone joining us in the dry domain of virtual reality and Facebook. It's good to be with you all. We have a lovely conversation to get into today, and the weather is very conducive to it because the conversation is really centering on cultivating an inner stillness and getting to a place within yourself where you're not being pulled and tugged by the forces of thought and concepts and mental formations and predetermined beliefs. Most of us are running on autopilot, very unconscious, sleepwalking through these domains of the mind and the heart, where we just automatically feel like we know who we are, we know what the world is, we know the people in our life and what they're capable of doing and not doing. And all of these pre-patterned predispositions and habits become invisible cages within our consciousness. And so one of the main avenues of spiritual training is to cultivate a quiet mind. Without a quiet mind, you really do not have the capability or capacity to understand your deeper nature, because the deeper nature can only be learned in silence. That's why he says in A Course in Miracles very beautifully, only a quiet mind can remember God. And so when we look at our minds, especially if we're just starting out on the spiritual path, it's anything but quiet. We got, crowds of people and voices going on, clamoring for our attention. And this is why we come to the spiritual path oftentimes, because there's so much unrest and disquiet and unease in our life, and things, even if they look pretty on the outside, we can't oftentimes enjoy the beautiful blessings that the external world is affording us, because we don't have the inner peace. We don't have that ability to actually stop and smell the roses and appreciate these moments of blessing, because we're racing in our mind off to the next thing. And in the East, they, quite familiar to us by now, have termed this the monkey mind. And the reason being is because a monkey will jump from branch to branch in its quest for fruit. And one of the things that you'll see if you observe monkeys in the wild is that they'll take the fruit, take a bite, and throw the fruit on the ground. And then they're off to the next thing. And that's often how we act in our concepts, in our desires, in our interests and motivations. We get it, we look at it, we take a bite, we like it, but we're still distracted to the next thing. And so there is this constant jumping around on the internal level. And this is another thing that he'll say in A Course in Miracles quite nicely, that the ego is that part of you that is the monkey mind, that separate self that's ever seeking and never finding. Just another piece of fruit, another bite, and down on the ground it goes. And all the while, there's still the unrest, that, impulse to go to the next branch. That's why in the spiritual practice, it's so important to stop the internal dialogue and the machinery that's always churning up another thought, another image, another feeling to chase after, like the monkey with the fruit. So it's very beautiful to see that we can use words and concepts to elicit the state of quietude. So, it says in the Proverbs of Solomon in the Bible that life and death reside in the tongue. And so when you speak words of life, as we're talking about here, it's words that actually elicit the experience of inner silence. That the intention of the language that's being used here is very much like what they say in the East in the tantric traditions. It's twilight language. It brings you from the external realm to this place within you that borders the worlds. The twilight language takes you from the darkness of material, physical experience, and it brings you to the border of where the pure light of pure being resides in your deeper essence. And so the twilight language bridges the dark and the light. And so this is the intention here, that this language literally has the capability of eliciting this entry into the domains of light within the pure essence of your being. Now, there are other ways to use language that will keep you blocked and locked out of your pure state and your pure happiness. And we'll see in some of the poems that we'll look at this morning what that entails. But for our time together this morning, it's really important that we recognize the priority put upon the cultivation of inner silence. And so it always begins, if you look at the esoteric teachings, no matter what school or tradition, that the breath is paramount. That when you begin to focus on your breathing and just naturally allow the breathing to rise and fall in a full and deep and slow rhythm, that it actually resets your autonomic nervous system. So do that with me now. Just bring your attention onto your breath, and you can still listen and grasp everything that's being said. But the breath itself is becoming more of a abiding friend as you begin to turn your awareness onto the breath. And one of the earliest teachings that we have of the historical Buddha is the Anapanasati Sutta, which is the full awareness of breathing sutta. And one of the ways that he has us looking at our breath is to silently tell ourselves, breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. And breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. And in this simple exercise, if you commit yourself to this practice of simply following the breath, it will open up these hidden, subtler dimensions of your own consciousness. And it's there where you'll find the mind quieting down, and the rapidity or wavelength of your thoughts will elongate and slow. And what we're looking to really focus on and deepen and concentrate upon is that space between the falling of one thought and the arising of the next. That just like a wave, there is this 0 point or still point between the waves of each thought that arises. And so just like your breath, your thought waves are going to eventually sync up. So as your breath deepens and slows down, your thought waves will deepen and slow down. As you become more settled and concentrated, you begin to sense that there is a space between breath as there is a space between thought. That before your next inhale, your exhale will completely finish. And there is that little pause or gap between each breath. And that too is a completely free, 0 point. Zero in the sense of there's no two-ness. It's completely in a state of non-duality. It actually is what's called the trini in Sanskrit. And this is the idea of the third. So the inhale is 1, the exhale is 2, and the gap between the breath is called the third. And that's where we get the word transcendent. Transcendent actually comes from the root tra, which is 3. So in order to get beyond the dualities of good and evil, right and wrong, good and bad, pleasure and pain, subject and object, life and death, we have to investigate and become intimate with the third, the transcendent. So I brought a few friends along, and as we explore our poetry this morning, make sure that you stay within this cultivating practice throughout the entirety of the service if that feels good for you, that you are allowing the mind to continually settle upon the flow or current of your breath so that you're integrating, entraining the body-mind system with the breathing rhythm so that all dimensions, your body, your breath, and your mind, become synchronized. So we're going to look today. My lovely Lisa had loaned me this book, Love Poems from God, and it's a compendium, a collection of different authors from the East and the West, translated by Daniel Ladinsky. And let's start with this one. This is called Intimate. And just what we were saying, and Meister Eckhart will help us even deepen this understanding of first becoming intimate with ourselves. That when we're on the spiritual path, yes, inner quietude is really a priority. It's a foundation stone in self-realization. You cannot discover God if your inner self is in turmoil and chaos. You just won't see. You may fill yourself with concepts and beliefs and read the books and go to workshops and do all of this outward seeking. But like the monkey with the fruit, you'll be off to the next thing, the next teacher, the next book, and that other fruit will be on the jungle floor. So self-intimacy basically is where you start to really abide with wherever you may be at this moment. So another practice that the Buddha had was this insight or mindfulness meditation, that when the body begins to settle down and the mind begins to relax into the breathing rhythm, the deeper aspects that were hidden in the subconscious mind begin to come up for reevaluation, for inspection. And so as you begin to recognize these forgotten or hidden or denied or repressed aspects of your subconscious mind, it could be sometimes very elating, very depressing, very terrifying, upsetting, etc. And what the Buddha prescribes is whatever's coming up, be the impartial witness. Be the impartial witness. Allow what's coming up to come up because it's releasing so that you can clear it. It's not coming back to torment you. It's not so that you have to then project your judgment and blame on whoever was part of that image or memory or what have you. Not to blame yourself for doing what you did. It's actually to recognize it for what it was, see it for what it was, know that you'll never repeat those mistakes if that's the case. But then with the calm, compassionate awareness of impartiality and equanimity, you allow these repressed parts of your psyche to, like soap bubbles, pop in the air. And you just allow this emptying of the storehouse of your consciousness. One of the reasons why we actually are attracted to disquiet and this loss of true self-intimacy is because we're afraid to look at what's been in our subconscious, what we've done in our past or what was done to us. And we know that if we were to quiet and stop, these more repressed aspects of the psyche will come up. But if we have the tools and the insight and the know-how on how to rest in this equanimity and know that these are like movie pictures that are coming back for us to see with a compassionate eye and to look and examine with the impartiality of somebody who really feels the love and the stillness as the bedrock of who they are in this moment, so that these things, again, can pass away like clouds. And when these repressed feelings, emotions, memories, images, experiences pass away, it's like these veils come off of the heart. And you begin to sense your own radiance. This is why this is twilight language. This language is capable of taking you on this inner journey into your own subconscious. And like a tour guide, a psychopomp, the language itself, the logos, the word, can bring you to a place of deep and powerful transformation so that you no longer repeat these dysfunctional patterns from the subconscious, and that, like the clouds that they really are, they can clear. And when they clear, you find the treasure that was hidden in the field. So, intimate. Now first he's going to talk about worldly knowledge. This is what he's describing above, this rational, discursive, dualistic knowledge. He says knowledge always deceives. It always limits the capital T truth. Every concept and image does. From cage to cage, the caravan moves, but I give thanks. For at each divine juncture, my wings expand, and I touch him more intimately. So let's look at this and break it down a bit. So he's referring to capital T truth, this hidden essence and radiant self that is at the core of your being, your spiritual center, your true identity, your real self that is undiscovered. And really what is causing the monkey to act in such a neurotic way is because that part of your mind that has been given over to the agenda of the monkey misses its home. It wants to return to the radiant kingdom of love within the core of its heart. But it feels locked out. And all of those subconscious problems and sewage and debris and concepts and knowledge are keeping the monkey from knowing which direction to go. Again, the beauty of this twilight language is it's designed when one is ready to turn from the world of the monkey, this outward seeking and never finding, and begin the journey to clear the blocks, go through the clouds, and back home into the radiant kingdom of love within the center of the heart. So knowledge always deceives because it's always based within a dualism of a split mind, subject and object. I think about things. Science investigates these separate entities and situations and phenomena and forces. These things are detached from me. I am not that. I am looking at that. I am discovering that. And there's an inherent gulf between me as the subject and the object that I'm seeing. And the truth of the matter is there's no separation anywhere. And so this type of knowledge deceives because it limits the all-encompassing truth that knows no opposite. So this is why Lao Tzu was saying the Tao Te Ching, when you follow the knowledge of the world, you add to your mind something new every day. You're accumulating, you're acquiring, you're getting. When you follow the path of the Tao, the sage continues, you lose something every day. You let go, you undo. So it's removing the clouds, removing the self-deceptions, removing the blocks. It's a very different way than the way of the world, which is the way of acquisition. This is the way of equalizing, seeing that there is a hidden substance, like an oceanic presence, that is giving rise to every wave form of experience, including the one perceiving from where you see yourself. There is one ocean seeing itself in a multitude of wave forms. And if the wave doesn't recognize its deeper essence, this radiant core of spirit, it will misperceive everything. And it will deceive itself. My wave doesn't look like that wave, and I'll focus on everything that that wave has that's different from me. And what's even crazier is if I'm being the monkey mind, I think I can get by taking from whatever wave I want and somehow have success if I mistreat certain waves. It's total insanity. And it's a pure lack of intimacy. That's why the more we acquire this inner recognition of who we are, and this light dawns in our mind and we begin to have this intimacy return, we realize, as the Bible says, love your neighbor as yourself. Because your neighbor is yourself. It's just another appearance of the one oceanic presence that we call God. That's why, again, in these higher teachings of self-knowledge, true knowledge, compassion is at the heart. When we act compassionately, we are recognizing the shared unity. We are seeing the ocean and the wave simultaneously. And by doing that, we come back to who we are as this divine reality. So Meister Eckhart says, if you're in this separate view of self versus other, every concept that you have and every image that your mind conjures will block you from truth. And then he uses this beautiful illustration. From cage to cage, the caravan moves. He's talking about the train of thought. That every thought that follows upon another thought in your ever-churning mind is another cage that's limiting and blocking and distorting truth. And then he says, but I give thanks because he's cultivating this intimacy. And he's no longer a slave to the thoughts that are endlessly running. He's tamed the monkey mind. So he says he gives thanks because at each divine juncture, my wings expand. In other words, between each thought, there's the 0-point field, that gap that you find between breath and that gap that you find between thought. And it's the doorway into the third, transcendent, limitless, beyond boundaries, beyond duality, beyond subject and object dualisms. And when you enter that, you're in ecstasy. And you give thanks because you're now drinking the nectar of divine love and intimate union with God. And it's literally between thoughts. That's how intimate it is. And even the thoughts, when seen clearly, are simply waves of this ocean of intimacy. But that may come later. First, find that ground, as Eckhart would call it, the Grund. Find that ground, that stillness, and no longer, like the monkey, chase after your thoughts. Go deep into yourself. Become intimate with these hidden depths of you. It will utterly alter the mask version that you've been identifying as and pantomiming. You will know that you're God in drag. So this twilight language can trigger this within these subtler, deeper energy dimensions. You may even feel like energy pulsations in the middle of your brain. This third eye, this crystal eye, maybe that's beginning to come online so that you can traverse the boundary between the external and the internal. And it's this inner vision that will light up. Because at each juncture, your wings will expand. And that version of yourself will undergo a metamorphosis. Every time that you can touch that silence, the monkey gets weaker. It no longer is pulling you the way it normally would. And you feel more expansive. And a sense of quiet becomes more palpable and deepens at the core of you. Which also deadens the nerves, if you will, that were being so tormented with the searching outward. You have to find that thing. You have to find that person to be complete, to be happy. If I don't, I can't be happy, and my life won't be worth living. When you quiet and open, and this intimacy becomes really real, this light comes on from deep within, and you realize everything that you were disturbed by not finding out there has now been located where it really is. And that's why you give thanks. I think this one is just so sweet. Again, Meister Eckhart. Love Does That is the title. All day long, a little burro labors, sometimes with heavy loads on her back, and sometimes just with worries about things that bother only burros. And worries, as we know, can be more exhausting than physical labors. Once in a while, a kind monk comes to her stable and brings a pear. But more than that, he looks into the burro's eyes and touches her ears, and for a few seconds, the burro is free and even seems to laugh, because love does that. Love frees. So this is part of how we have been deceiving ourselves through this false knowledge. Sometimes a lot of us will acquire a lot of metaphysical knowledge and religious knowledge and learn all of these things about God and angels and demons and the universe and maybe even the occult, etc., etc. And what we fail to look at, because we're so beguiled by the glamour of our false knowledge, is the true nature of love itself, which is the core reality. It's so simple. And it doesn't reside in these high-minded concepts. It's something that will innately, overwhelmingly at times, comfort you. That's one of the ways that you'll know love is making its presence known within your heart. Because just like this burro, we're burdened. We go through our struggles and our worries. But when love touches us, there is a sense, maybe ever so slightly, that we're free, that we can open our wings, that we can relax. And we must give that to ourselves. No one else can, because we even said this. Sometimes we can have all of the exterior accoutrements and even the most loving people in our life. But because we're in inner conflict and we lack that inner silence, we can't receive the love. Maybe it comes in the form of a little pear, or a rub on the ear, or a look in the eye, just for that split second. But because our minds are so jumpy and anxiety-ridden and thirsting after this mirage of what we think we need in order to be happy, we can't sense or see when love actually appears in its simplicity, in its intimacy. So we must, above all else, want that for ourselves. And in wanting it, as he says so nicely in the Course, the means will be provided. The means will be provided. You know, speaking of the Course, my mind just jumped to this passage that I find so beautiful and so appropriate for where we are in our conversation. It's in the section called The World That Shines with Love. In other words, when we begin to recognize who we truly are as the expression, the intimate expression of the ocean of God, and we realize that every other form, every other living entity is another living, intimate expression of the ocean of God, then we begin to see this translucency, what he calls vision. The spiritual eye opens, and you see a completely different world. You don't see a world made up of separate bodies. You see a world that is completely interconnected and woven together in a very subtle spiritual network of love. And communication is instant. And holographically, we each reflect one another and impact one another and feel the internal states of one another and give and receive from one another in a state of holiness and grace. That's the real world that shines with love when our inner vision opens. But in order to see it, he says, you have to give up the world you made. Because the world that we made ain't that. It doesn't show us anything other than the burro's world of struggle and burden, heaviness. And even if we have been blessed with people and loving relationships, again, oftentimes because of the struggle, because of the self-deception, we can't even see or taste or know it. So we have to learn this undoing. Remember, like Lao Tzu said, you have to lose something of the world you made every day in order to come to this place of the real world, which is the one that you really want. So you have to end the world of the monkey mind and enter the world of the Christ mind. And this language can be an aid to you when you're no longer dominated by the monkey mind. But he says you have to learn to give up the world you made. He says the world you see must be denied because it's costing you sight of a different kind of world. You cannot see both worlds, for each of them involves a different kind of seeing and depends on what you cherish. Get this. The sight of one is possible because you denied the other. You cannot see two worlds. You see the one you select. And it's totally complete. You get a self that appears as the self in the world you've selected. The body self, the monkey mind, or the spiritual being and the Christ mind, both versions of you. And when you go into that 0 point between the waves of thought, you get to reset. You get to disrobe. You get to spread your wings and reconnect to this other possible world. You know, if you're familiar with the teachings of Patanjali, a yoga teacher from the early 500s of our common era, he wrote the Yoga Sutras. It's a very popular book. Maybe you've heard of this. One of the things that Patanjali says in the Yoga Sutra is Yoga Chitta Vritti Narodha, that yoga is the stilling of the mind waves. That's his definition of yoga. That when you still the mind waves, you enter into what he calls Narodha, the 0 point, the stopping, the stillness. It's the same word the Buddha used in his Four Noble Truths. In order to get out of suffering, you have to go into Narodha, the 0 point. And what Patanjali says, and the reason why I bring it up here is it's so important, that when you go into this ground of being, which is right here between the caravans and cages of your thoughts, when you enter the gap and you relax into it without an agenda and not allowing the monkey to pull you out, Patanjali says you actually begin to acquire what he calls Narodha samskaras. These are mental impressions that are traces of this 0-point field of your higher self, so that when you come back into the thought waves, these Narodha samskaras go to work within your normal patterning of thought, and it begins to break up your erroneous perception, just like Jesus says miracles do. That these, he also calls them, in the commentaries on the Yoga Sutras, terminator samskaras. They put an end to the torturing movie of the burro or the monkey, and you start to find naturalness in the silent, divine state. And your vision opens to the oceanic presence that is everything and everywhere. But in order to have this release and re-enter the kingdom of God, you have to give up the world you made, this caravan of cages. He says, this aching world has not the power to touch the living world at all, right? Two different realities. And if you choose one, the other doesn't exist for you. And you're convinced the one you selected is the only reality. There's no doubt. You have total evidence and all the witnesses to prove it. So one doesn't touch the other at all. You could not give this aching world the power to actually intrude upon the living world. God's world is never threatened by the war and the turmoil and the terror of the human world, the world of birth and death. He says, this is so good. Although you turn in sadness from this world, you cannot find in it the road that leads away from it to another world. It feels like you're at an impasse. That everywhere you look, it's just another illusion, another version of something that caused you to stay in this world. You can't get out. You're in the duality. Even our religions, some of us have spent decades in spiritual belief systems, religions, thinking that if I dot my I's and cross my T's and get everything right and follow the book or follow the guru or do this or do that, somehow this will bring me the relief that I'm seeking. It will begin to show me the other world. And if we're still within the concept of the self that is separate from everything else, you'll never escape that world. So this is what he says, not me. There's no exit from this world except what we're going to touch on next. And he says, but the real world has the power to touch you even here because you love it. And what you call with love will come to you. So think about the power that is still residing within your heart. We again are so distracted and deceived by our false knowledge that we don't realize this world-shaking power of love and the request for the love to come back to its source. Not go on an endless journey of branch to branch as the monkey mind, but to return and find the source of love. When you call for that, he says, love will come to you. That's the way out of this world. He says, love always answers. Being unable to deny a call for help or not to hear the cries of pain that rise to it from every part of this strange world you made but do not want. The only effort you need make to give this world away in glad exchange for one you did not make is willingness to learn the one you made is false. And this learning of the falsity of the world, again, is another major bedrock on the spiritual path. What we talked about earlier in this calming and quieting principle that is at the heart of all true spiritual knowledge, it is one wing of the bird, this quieting of the mind. The other wing, which will then produce the flight, is insight. As you quiet the mind, calm the heart, and allow all of those waves to still, you'll realize that everything that you thought of as yourself, your world, your reality, unchangeable, immovable facts, physical laws, etc., laws of economy, supply and demand, have and have-nots, democracy and tyranny, whatever way the mind has constructed its world. When it quiets and cultivates this insight to really look at what we invested our truth in, it's all self-deception, as Eckhart told us. It disintegrates. That's why St. John of the Cross has this amazing poem where it's nada, 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 which is Spanish for nothing. So with quieting and clear seeing, it's a no-brainer to give up the world you made because the one you made is false. It doesn't really exist. It's a mirage. And then you can find the real world that shines with love. And your mind will be illumined and quiet and guiltless and intimately connected with the holiness of all living things. The subconscious storehouse will have been emptied and purified, and the only thing remaining will be the memory of God and our shared identity. And from that, the play can begin again. Just maybe one or two more from Eckhart. First, we talked about how life and death reside within the tongue. And what we've been feasting upon this morning, I hope, are words of life that can bring us to the shore of nirvana, the kingdom of God, our happiness. the misuse of language, and this is something very interesting, and it comes with the cultivation of insight, that the misuse of language can be a very detrimental, dangerous, and harmful thing on a personal and a collective level. And so we want to make sure that our thought, speech, and action are all harmonized. That because we're thinking thoughts of life and God realization, that our words will reflect that and our behavior will extend that. They all go together. They all need to be synchronized, integrated. So this is Eckhart's poem called A Plague. What a cruel act to be untruthful. Earthquakes happen in the heart that hears sounds that are amiss. Havoc is created in the mind that can no longer trust someone once loved. And schisms devour alliances that help support our life. Words can enrich and be as wonderful spices mixed into the days we imbibe with all our senses. There are fields in the soul, lush, organic meadows. Those sounds and words that fall there can be at times a poison. A plague is spread by one who cannot tell the truth. So this is what happens too as we quiet the mind and allow the subconscious storehouse to percolate and release what's been repressed and hidden and denied. We'll oftentimes see where we've missed the mark, where we have lied to ourselves and also lied and harmed others and set earthquakes off in our life, in our relationships, and wreaked havoc with the people nearest and dearest to us. A plague. Now, the beauty of it is, and those who are in, let's say, a 12-step program know that you have the power within you to make amends, to clean up, to own, take responsibility for how you showed up in the past, and get, really, not just go through the motions of it, but get the impact that it had for the person that was affected by your words, by your lies, by the havoc that you caused. It's part of this quieting down. Because these are the specters that will haunt our meditations. They will come to us as these subconscious impressions and past feelings and memories. And oftentimes you may, if you don't do it within the space of your own meditation, have to, or be guided to really, go out and make amends. Speak the truth now and own and clean up what it is that you've caused. And if it's been done to you, to allow yourself the gift of forgiving that person and learning the lesson that they were there to teach you about you. There are no victims. And if somebody wreaked havoc with lies and dishonesty upon you, you must see with insight how that was allowed through your door. Why such a character was able to get past security and enter into your inner chambers. There was a lesson there, and your inner guidance will show you and give you the release to allow that person to go to their highest good as you continue going into yours. blue bag's going to go around, my friends. And if you're joining us on Facebook, please, you can find a link provided or go to unityofstewart.org and make your donations there. We thank you, everyone, for your gratitude in supporting our church. And as always, let's hear from y'all. Any feedback, thought, questions? Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. 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 Yeah, well, you know what they said in terms of black holes, that at the center of our galaxy is a black hole. And so when you get in, when you get into these, high frequency star regions at the core of our galaxy and plasma at the core, there's something even deeper in that, again, transcends what is space-time and the duality of the elements of space-time. And what they're saying, and what the sages, the rishis of India recognized thousands of years ago in the Chandogya Upanishad, is that the sun is a miniature of the galaxy, and that same sun in the galaxy heart resides in my heart. So there's a black hole in my heart, a singularity that I can go through. So there's no separation. There's no, space that we have to traverse. This is part of thinking with a wrong mind, that we have to conquer the ranges of space. But it's really about getting back into this inner quiet and realize that you can transcend all the need for this outward moving activity by finding this singularity within your own heart. And that's the treasure. Indeed, it's been sewn deep into our own fabric, and it's waiting for us to discover it. Let's bless the offering. Thank you. And we just give thanks and praise and are asking that this money be charged with the intention to bring light and love into all hearts and minds. And so it is. Amen. Thank you, Joe. Anyone else in the final moments? Share, ask questions. Sure. Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it totally frees us from conflict. So, like you had said, love has us transcending all forms of religion, but the beautiful thing is that when we're in this, really settled place of love, not only do we transcend, but we include. So that's why we don't have to, when we come back to this place of settledness in God, we're not running away from the world. We're in the world. We're embracing the world. We're seeing the one in all forms, including all religions. This has been a long desire of mine to bring out the common threads within all these different forms of religion, because deep down they really are all, in whispers and gestures pointing us towards this freedom of love. Yeah. 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 An interdependence, an interbeing, one organism. We didn't get to Eckhart's poem today, but he's talking about how we're all notes in the symphony of God, all cells within the body of God, that there is no way that one of us can exist apart from this integral whole. And the more we start to recognize our interbeing, the happier we become. When we're not recognizing our interbeing, we're selfishly driven. And we're trying to take and dominate from nature and others. And it's just a recipe for disaster. We're seeing the death throes of hypercapitalism now. That it's not sustainable to live this way. It's a disease in the heart. And hopefully we'll transcend and include it into something more grand and beautiful and all-inclusive. So with that, we leave on a positive note. We'll close out with our unity prayer. And we just want to settle within that quiet of the heart and know that God is, as Hafiz tells us, giving us good morning kisses within this inner chamber of the heart. And just nuzzle up and snuggle up to the sweet and dwelling presence of God. And surrender. And in this state of surrender, we know that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Oh, yes. Thank you, Roberta. We have our Thanksgiving. On that note, do you want to say it? First Methodist. Yeah, please join us for that. It's at 3 o'clock at First Methodist on Canner Highway. And we'll have a bunch of different faith traditions there. And you have flyers? Or no? Okay, yeah, you can see the flyer as you're leaving. All right, get out of here. Thank you, everybody. Oh, good, Patty.